Coming up, ESPN has weighed in with some preseason predictions. Alabama fans might not like it. Georgia fans might like it a little bit more. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you're with us. Hopefully you've kind of put the Masters coverage aside for a moment to watch a little SEC football with us. We're glad you have done that. We'll try to make good use of your time. A lot to get to today. We got some spring games coming up on Saturday. Actually, 3 around the SEC, so a lot of fun to come here.
And the FPI list, who obviously we're going to dive into big time, but as you guys know, this is one of BA's favorite times of year.
It is.
Lists like this start coming out for sure.
Yeah, no, exactly, and especially when it comes to some of this statistical stuff that can be a little bit confounding to what you sort of expected for it to be. In fact, let's start right there with item number 1 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. ESPN does publish its FPI data around this time every single year about the most likely outcome for the upcoming season and for all of college football is predicted here, but some folks have kind of sort of partitioned out the part that's sort of most interesting to SEC fans, including likelihood of winning the SEC championship. Take a look at this side-by-side comparison for a moment between Georgia and Alabama, because I think for some, this is going to be a little bit surprising. Alabama does come in at number 2 in the ESPN FPI data, but only a 37.1% chance of winning the SEC championship, compared to Georgia, which preseason rank at number 3. This is not a poll. This is based on sort of statistical empirical evidence, but Georgia given a 41.6% chance of winning the SEC. Mike, does that mean that Georgia's more likely to win the league than Alabama in 2018?
This is exactly how it played out last year, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it's a good point.
It's a lot like, and don't get this twisted, guys. Everybody watching on the show, this is not who wins in a head-to-head matchup or who's a better team right now. This is who has the more natural path, right, to get to an SEC championship, and you saw that play out. Georgia and Alabama lose to the same team at the same place in the regular season, and Georgia, playing out of the SEC East, makes that path to the SEC championship game and is able to beat Auburn in the rematch. That's exactly what I'm reading right now on this piece of paper. Listen, for everything you feel good about Alabama, Auburn's in their division, and so they have to go through Auburn. They have to beat Auburn, who we talked about yesterday is naturally the third, big team when you talk about the SEC right now. So Georgia doesn't have to navigate around that. They're playing out of the SEC East, which is a little bit less of an uphill battle.
Bo Molinari says, I get it. Just like you just said, they're saying the West is tougher than the East, so statistically the Dogs have a better chance. And when you look at the data with Georgia's slightly more likely team to win the SEC, that's certainly the first thing that comes to mind here. But think about this for a moment. The toughest team on Alabama's schedule is also the toughest team on Georgia's schedule in Auburn.
Yep.
I mean, Georgia also plays LSU, by the way. What SEC West team does Alabama play that's very much more difficult than the toughest teams that Georgia plays in the East? So to say that Georgia has a much easier path with its conference schedule than Alabama does, I think is somewhat misleading, because Georgia does play both Auburn and LSU in 2018, and I really can't think of another West team that's going to be all that much tougher than South Carolina, which is in the top 25, or really even the average SEC East team. I mean, the truth is, the SEC West in 2018 is not the same SEC West it was in 2014, when a lot of these teams were ranked in the top 25.
It's fair, and you're talking about the matchups. The problem is that it's not so much who the teams are playing, it's who else is in their division. You know what I mean? Like it played out just like that last year, whereas Auburn won because they won the head-to-head matchup. If Auburn had been playing on the East last year, Bama would have gone to the SEC championship game and played Auburn in a rematch, just like Georgia did. So I understand what you're saying. Listen, I agree with you. I don't think the East is near as bad as it was a couple years back, but I'll take your South Carolina and I'll raise you a Mississippi State, a team that a lot of people can jump on.
Do you really think Mississippi State's going to be better than South Carolina?
I do. I actually kind of do. I'm not trendy on South Carolina. I'm really not. I don't know that they're going to be better in South Carolina per se, but that's kind of where I'm kind of ranking teams. I'll take your Florida. I'll see an LSU. I'll take whoever else you might have in third place, and I'll raise the Texas A&M. I think Ole Miss is going to be a team that's better than most people think next year. So there is, like I brought up, I think, I don't remember what the number was last year, head-to-head games between the East and the West, but the West was up like 11-2 on a lot of those games last year. So there are comparables, and you can look at it and say the East is gaining, but I still don't think it's as good as the West.
Chris Smith brings up an interesting point. He says, BA, that's me, keeps raving about Texas A&M until now. Here's my point about Texas A&M. I'm a long-range projection high on Texas A&M situation. I think by 2019, 2020, Jimbo Fisher's going to have built something there. But let's all think for a minute. This could be a homework assignment for us over the weekend. Some of you that are maybe quicker on your feet than me can answer right away. Who's the most successful first-year coach in SEC history? Whether it be first-time head coach like what Joe Moorhead's going to be, or first year in a new program like Jimbo Fisher.
Great question.
This is legitimate for Dan Mullen at Florida, for Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. Who's the most successful first-year coach in SEC history? Because for the most part, what you see is Kirby Smart, 8 wins in his first year at Georgia. Mark Richt, 8 wins in his first year at Georgia. Saban, 7 wins in his first year at Alabama? Look at Urban Meyer's first year at Florida. There's not, even for great coaches, there's not some long list of knock it out of the park in your very first year on the job. That doesn't happen very much. Moorhead and Fisher and all those guys have got to deal with that. They may prove something in year 2. Most of the really good coaches do. But in year 1, it almost trips up everybody.
Yeah, I understand that. I think of this as less of a takeover job, to where Dan Mullen left Mississippi State in a good spot. I mean, this is not like, well, he got fired and he was shown the door and he had to get out of the building because his players were so bad. This is not a Tennessee situation. Joe Moorhead's taken over a very good football team, and maybe the answer might be Les Miles. I think Les Miles had a pretty good year at LSU, and that's because Nick Saban left him in a good spot and headed on to the NFL. So I look at it more of a situation of he's still got a lot of talent left. It's not like Dan Mullen was showing the door, and for that reason, I think Mississippi State is a scary team.
Miles would have been a good answer. He did win the West in 2005. That's kind of interesting. The other thing you point out here is it's kind of funny. Higher national rank for Alabama, all based on the data of 10,000 simulations. Higher national rank for Alabama, better chance for Georgia to win the SEC. That is similar to a year ago, but when it comes to reliving 2017, as we've told you before, Kirby Smart wants no part about that. He's not talking about Alabama at all. Here's Kirby.
I don't even talk about it. So the fact that they're talking to y'all about it is just because you asked. And if you ask our kids, their immediate response is, oh yeah, it's motivation, it's motivation. We don't discuss that because that team is no longer here. I mean, I don't believe in motivating through fear or motivating just through revenge. Now, can revenge be a factor? Yeah. But we don't have Alabama on our schedule next year, not the regular season schedule. We got a lot more to worry about than that.
So Kirby says he's not worried about that. He doesn't want his players worried about that. Doesn't want the media asking them kind of those kinds of questions. He said before that what he wants is his players getting their motivation from within. Here's a little more of Kirby.
I would rather have some kind of intrinsic motivation of, I want to be the best player I can be. I want to get to be the best I can be. I don't want it to be because of this, because you may not always have that. You may not always have that ability to generate that motivation. So we don't really talk about it. I mean, we talk about the lessons we learn in coverage, the lessons we learn in keeping the quarterback in the pocket, protecting the ball. We learn lessons from the game, but we're not using the game as a mantra, a battle cry. I just don't think that's what you want to do.
By the way, our buddy Brandon Walker checking in the comment section brings up a good point. We're talking about successful first-year coaches. He does mention you had a good one. The Les Miles won the West in his first year. Gus Malzahn also wins the SEC in his first year at head coach at Auburn. And that was a big-time turnaround given how bad Auburn had been in 2012. That's a really good answer there. But when it comes back to what Kirby said there, the ESPN FPI data, I think for a lot of Georgia fans and a lot of Alabama fans, the thought of maybe a collision course between these two teams in December, it seems pretty hard to avoid that conversation.
It definitely does. And it's tough for me, though, because I said this last year when we were talking about Alabama. I fully expected Bama to lose a game during the regular season. I didn't think it was going to be Auburn, but I told you before that it's just so hard to go undefeated during the regular season. It's hard to run that gauntlet. It's hard to get up week in and week out. And so we look at it, as of April right now and say, boy, they should win. And they're probably both going to be favored, every game on the schedule. But every now and then that game jumps up and sneaks up and gets you. And it was Auburn last year for both those teams. And it's going to be tough. I think both of these teams have a ton to navigate this year if they're going to get back there. With that being said, as an Alabama guy, if Bama and Georgia don't face off in the next 2 years at all, I feel like I'm robbed.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm robbed of an opportunity.
How do you think I'm going to feel?
I feel like I'm robbed of an opportunity. I would love to see those teams face.
Esteban Estevez says in order for college football to stay relevant, they have to keep Bama in the run for championship. They have to have a good guy versus a bad guy. That's what sells in ratings. Do you think that Georgia works as a good guy against Alabama's bad guy here, though? I mean, because when it comes to our show, I don't know if it's just people just picking on me or what, but it doesn't really feel like Georgia, who has a lot of resources, has a lot of pizzazz behind it. It doesn't really feel like Georgia sort of fits the good guy, white hat role against Alabama there. Is that a good guy versus bad guy?
I think it is, because I think on the national scale, if you're not an Alabama fan, a lot of people take the thought of anybody but Bama. Listen, I don't care who it is, anybody but Bama. Please, somebody take away the Bama fans and the Roll Tides and the Nick Sabans and anybody but Bama at this point. I think for a lot of people, they look at Georgia and think that's the rest of the SEC's best opportunity as of now to get to where Bama has been.
So a good comment from Esteban over there on the YouTube page. We'll keep taking those YouTube comments throughout the day here on SEC Country Live. Thanks for those of you checking in on Facebook as well. Let's move on to item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list for a moment and keep the ESPN FBI data a part of our conversation here. And let's talk about the Florida Gators. Now, before I show you some numbers on Florida or talk to you about some numbers on Florida, let me go back in time to when Dan Mullen was first announced as Florida coach and Scott Strickland was speaking on Mullen's behalf. Mullen's had big talk about how he wants to get Florida back to that sort of Urban Meyer, Steve Spurrier era of winning championships. And what Scott Strickland said is that he's not ashamed of that, and he's proud of the fact that his coach embraces those big championship expectations because that's what's attached to you when you coach at Florida. Here is what Scott Strickland, the Gators AD, said a couple of months ago.
He is not afraid to be aspirational. There are leaders who are afraid to put themselves out there because you put a high bar and you don't reach it, you're worried about being criticized. And Dan, his confidence is at such a level that he knows the expectations here are going to be to win championships. So don't hide from it. Talk about it. He's going to be judged. All of our coaches here are judged based on their ability to win at that level.
So Strickland says something interesting there. Don't hide from it. Talk about it. Embrace the fact that they're championship expectations. Well, according to the ESPN FBI data, some good, bad news, depending on how you want to spin this for Florida. On the one hand, Florida is the 21st team in the ESPN FPI rankings. If that holds up, that's a top 25 ranking for Dan Mullen in his first year. For the most part, that's pretty good. But this same ESPN FPI data only gives Florida a 3.4% chance of winning the SEC. Compare that to Georgia at 41.6, Alabama, we just quoted from, at 37.1, just 3.4% chance, virtually no chance at all, in other words, of winning the SEC in 2018. Yeah. So on the one hand, you might be top 25. On the other hand, you are a long way away from competing for an SEC championship if this data holds. If you're a Florida fan, how do you view that?
I feel like I'm in a good spot. I got to be honest with you. If I'm a Florida fan, I look at this schedule, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the strength of record and the opportunity to get to where you want to go and the percentages. I don't see – there's some big names on this schedule. Don't get me wrong. I think the crossover game with Mississippi State is a tough game for Dan Mullen to head to Starkville. I think the crossover game with LSU, as always, is a tough game. But those teams are – I mean, LSU, to me, is not the LSU of yesteryear yet. I think they have a lot of work to do in front of them. Florida State, this is a huge opportunity for Florida to be able to jump up and beat Florida State in Willie Taggart's first year. I don't know what you're getting out of Tallahassee. And so while the names are going to be there, I don't know that you should be that worried about South Carolina. I mean, I'm not saying Florida's going to beat them. I'm saying in terms of how the season could end up. I think Florida has an opportunity to get South Carolina. I think Florida has an opportunity to beat LSU. I think Florida has an opportunity, to beat some of the other teams on their schedule, including FSU. The Georgia game stands out as the one that is really going to be an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. But, it's a neutral site game, and Florida could possibly get that done too.
Jonathan Davis says Florida's going to be the X factor in the SEC, which is kind of what you talked about there. But I don't know in this case if X factor means good enough to win something of its own or just good enough to prevent somebody else from winning. I'm not quite sure. And I think my overall issue here is this is not so much Dan Mullen's problem. Obviously, he is going to talk about championships. But Florida, and this is coming from the biggest Georgia guy in the world and a noted Gator hater here, Florida should never, as a program, have dipped down to such a point where they've got less than a 4% chance winning the SEC. That's an embarrassment for how that program has been run. If this data is right, and none of us are smart enough to sort of argue with the stats here, if this data is right, this speaks to horrible mismanagement of the Florida program. I think you've got to blame more than Jim McElwain for this. It takes more than one guy to drive a program like this into a ditch. If this number is right, that's a humiliation for Florida.
I think a lot of Florida fans would probably agree with you.
I think they should. It's not a shot at Florida. Right. We can all have common ground on this.
No, you look at that the same way I used to look at this Tennessee situation from Tennessee. That a year ago I was saying Butch Jones needs to be fired, needs to be shown the door because it's embarrassing the way I think of Tennessee and what they actually were on the field. I think that's what you're alluding to and saying Florida should have never gotten to this point. It should have never got to the point where it's a 3% chance of winning the SEC. And I agree with you. Label it what we want to, label it embarrassing, label it whatever you want to. let's look at how things are getting turned around, and I think they've already turned the corner on that. I think getting rid of Jim McElwain, you've started to get these things done. I love what Dan Mullen's doing so far, and I think the trajectory is only up. It's down right now, but I think it's hit the bottom of where it should be.
TJ Hill says, actually, let me read Austin Moore here on Facebook. Austin Moore says, Florida better find a quarterback if they want to be a factor in the Charleston Southern game. He says that, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I agree. This same ESPN FPI data gives Florida sort of an average projection of 8 wins. Right now, with the uncertainty at quarterback, I am definitely leaning the direction of under that 8. In fact, the Vegas number for Florida when it comes out in a few weeks is almost for sure going to be less than that. It's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.5 with juice on the under. And I think that you still probably go in the direction of that. To me, right now, I have a hard time finding a sure 7 wins in this Florida schedule.
Sure, yeah, finding the 7, but I have trouble finding the for sure 5 losses as well. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure what the product's going to be because I am, like as we've noted, I'm a big Dan Mullen believer. They do have to find the quarterback. If Kyle Trask is your guy, if he's 1A right now, I think that it tempers my expectations a little bit, but I'm not to say that Kyle Trask can't go out and run this offense to the best of his ability. I don't know, but it's when I look at their schedule, I think a lot of games are not winnable, but I don't think a lot of games are not winnable, but I don't see one that looks that daunting is what I was trying to say earlier. I mean, yes, they're playing LSU. Does that scare you as much as it did 5 years ago? No. Right. I mean, the Georgia game is going to be a tough one, but I'm not huge on South Carolina. Florida State doesn't scare me like they did 3 years ago, and all the other games on their schedule are easily winnable. So I think 8's the right number. I'm probably right at 8 or 9 right now myself.
TJ Hill on Facebook reminding us, like someone else mentioned a moment ago, that when you talk about very successful first-year coaches, you do have to mention Gus Malzahn. It's easy to forget about that. It was back in 2013, but he did win the SEC in that first year there at Florida. So pretty good stuff. Jared Seegers, by the way, predicting that Vanderbilt's going to beat Florida. So there are some Florida believers in our comment section every day, and no shortage of Florida doubters here. That should be pretty interesting to watch that unfold. Let me do item number 3 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, and sort of some weird red flag style questions about some LSU draft prospects. I'm not quite sure what this means. I don't know that any of these stories are necessarily connected, but it's sort of weird that all of this is sort of centering around one team. If you don't mind, let's start with the Darius Geis part of this first. There was a tweet that came out about Darius Geis having some off-field problems. Let me show you the tweet, what one draft analyst said about Darius Geis here in terms of having a little bit of off-field stuff. This is Dan Hatman, who's some sort of draft analyst. He's got a blue check next to his name. He says, the texts are coming in on this one, and it sounds like off-field going to be more of an issue for Darius Geis than I originally thought. Off-field issues for Darius Geis, what could they be? Geis himself offering his own explanation for this, saying it comes down to video games. He says, and I got this quote from SECCountry.com. I'm honestly not sure what it originated with to begin with. They're talking about my video gaming. I don't feel like it's a problem. I actually asked a lot of teams about it. They came back and told me a lot of the guys on the team do video games. When people tell me that stuff, I only assume they're talking about video games because I have 0 off-the-field issues. Is excessive video game use an off-the-field issue? I mean, how much video games do you have to play for it to be an off-the-field issue?
I don't know. This is something that is like completely new to me because, when I was playing football, like Chad Johnson was always playing video games. A lot of these guys were always playing video games. They're like FIFA.
But you play with Chad Johnson?
No. I'm just saying that like this was something that always popped up. Chad Johnson was a big social media user, and he always had his like YouTube channel, whatever channel. He was always getting on challenge with people. I never thought this would be something that come up, but I guess where video games are at now, this becomes a bigger question in terms of how much time are you devoting to football, how much time are you devoting to training. I think there's a way to balance it, and especially when you get in the NFL and Darius Geis and you get kids and you get a wife and you're balancing all those things, I think the video games will take care of themselves. You'll be at the complex doing whatever. I understand why the question might be asked, but I don't think it's that big a deal for Darius Geis.
Now I will say this though. What you just said, I haven't really found that to be true in my own life. I'm not a big video game player, but I know a lot of people where they're playing too many video games 10 years ago and they're still playing too many video games now. Like, this is one of those things where, like, just because you get older doesn't mean you necessarily grow out of this. Right, just because you have responsibility doesn't mean you're still not, holed up in some basement somewhere, fighting Call of Duty or something like that.
No, I understand what you're saying. In terms of the people I played with, when you're at the complex and you're going to work, that's when you deal with your business. I think Darius Geis is extremely talented, and I think that he has a natural work ethic, and I think he has shown that that he can balance those things. That's why he's successful at LSU. So the question's going to be there. You're going to question every draft process, but it's like you said, when you talk about recruiting, all these kids are good. They've all got this upside. When you're talking about the draft, Boy, let's ask questions about everybody.
SEC Country weighing in, the official account here on the Facebook Live saying, true story, we hired Mike Johnson, that's you, despite his excessive video game usage. He plays old school Tecmo Bowl 24/7. Listen, if I'm going to play video games, it's going to be the old school stuff. It's going to be Tecmo Bowl, it's going to be Galaga. You're in pole position. You probably don't. You're a lot younger than me. But it's going to be one of those old school video games if I'm playing it. However, that's not the only LSU draft prospect that sort of get into a social media spat of sorts over his draft status. DJ Chark took umbrage with one draft analyst who was breaking down some practice film. The only problem from Chark's perspective is he said you're breaking down footage from my freshman year. He says this was spring football in my freshman year. At least critique my drills from senior year. It's Brad Kelly, the guy that's writing about this, saying, you know, he's got superhero athleticism, but when you watch that film, he's a work in progress, not a refined route runner. Is it fair to put Chark's freshman year up there as a reason why he's not a refined route runner?
This is so ridiculous. This is the problem with a lot of this things going on right now. Like, who knows? Everybody's, you know, some kind of so-called expert on everything that's going on right now. Go watch DJ Chark in the Senior Bowl. Go watch some of the performances this guy put on at times last year, and that'll answer all your questions about route running, about speed, about athletic burst, about everything else you want to know. You know, we got some people going on here looking at spring drills. I mean, come on, man. That's just a bad look for everybody right there.
But there is a chance he's not a good route runner, right? That may have been the only video the guy could find, but there's a chance he's not a good route runner.
There's a chance he's not a good route runner. And DJ Chark, you know what? He's going to land where he needs to be. But I look at it, I look and see what he can do. I look and see some of the plays he did make. And it shows up on film time after time when you watch LSU's film from last year. Guy's an explosive playmaker. He's a great wide receiver, and I think he'll have a good NFL career.
And then it brings you to Arden Key, who's, you know, on paper this time of year ago looked like the most talented player maybe in the entire SEC, did not have a good junior season, was who knows where during spring practice, and he's really had to sort of rebuild his image, rebuild his reputation here in the lead up to his NFL draft. LSU Pro Day this week. He didn't run a very good 40 time there, but he still felt pretty good about what he put on display. Here is Arden Key.
I felt great. I felt like I was in shape. I showed them speed, flexibility, power, flipping the hip, athletic. You know, I showed them the sophomore Arden Key.
He says he showed off the sophomore Arden Key, but my issue is this. Arden Key's like out there trying to prove, hey, what you think you know about me isn't the real me. Darius Guice is trying to combat the idea of having a bunch of off-field issues. DJ Chark's, you know, having people sort of addressing his fundamentals. These are three high-profile players from the same SEC team. Is it a bad look for LSU that there are so many questions about LSU players here?
I don't think so at all. I think that this is just a series of unfortunate events for a lot of these LSU players. I mean, this is going on all over the place. This is people are being asked these questions. I think you're just kind of seeing it steamrolled all into one right here. I mean, the bottom line is some of the top players from Alabama, Calvin Ridley, Minka Fitzpatrick, are sliding down draft boards. The quarterbacks are moving up. The defensive line are moving up. It's not really so much they did. So,
but hold on, Minka's still a first rounder.
They're both still in the first round.
But
I'm saying these were top 10 picks.
Let's not cry too many tears for a guy that's still got
I'm saying these were top 10 picks a month ago, and now you're looking at top 30 picks. Now you're looking at first rounders. Now you're looking at, you know, where these guys going, and it's not so much anything they did. I'm down on Arden Key a lot because of the speed he ran in his 40. It was a 4.9 40 at, you know, 238 pounds. He should be faster than that. He has way more quick twitch than that. But, you know, as far as Darius Guice goes, the questions have been about his hands. Can he be a 3-down back? He showed that at his pro day. He has very natural hands. And this DJ Chark thing, turn on the film and watch what he does during LSU games. That answers all my questions for those two guys.
Chase Smedley says any scout who doesn't realize he's watching freshman tape probably shouldn't be a scout. And part of the problem here is a lot of these guys who sort of pretend to be draft analysts aren't really scouts. They're just guys that got a Twitter account. But I know the LSU folks who watch the show are going to get irritated with me for saying this, but this does tie into a narrative that existed for LSU during the season. An offensive coaching staff that was so dysfunctional, the AD had to chaperone the film room sessions. Remember that? I mean, you had Aliva coming and sitting between Orgeron and Canada during some of these offensive film room sessions. You got, you know, Orgeron, who a little bit of a mess himself here. I mean, this does sort of fit into that narrative a little bit of a team last year that I'm not quite so sure was well coached.
But it doesn't go under the same ceiling for me. This is not under the same roof. You're talking about coaches that couldn't get along with each other, Matt Cannon and Ed Orgeron. That has nothing to do with what Arden Key's running in the 40. That has nothing to do with Arden Key leaving in the spring for personal reasons. That doesn't have to do with can Darius Guice catch balls out of the backfield. Those are not connected for me. You can't. I mean, look at the players that LSU has put in the NFL in the past 10 years. And for all the questions you had about Les Miles, can he win the big game? Can he get this done? Boy, they sure seem to be putting out some DBs and wide receivers the last 10 years.
Rick Keene has a funny line. He says LSU's gone from being DBU to he hate me you. I mean, it does seem like there's some haters out there for some of these LSU guys.
It definitely is, and I think it's like I said, though, and you brought this up before. This comes along with the territory when it comes time to get drafted. If you're not that locked first-round pick, and by the way, there's 90 guys being told they're first-round picks. So if you're not that locked first-round pick and one of these quarterbacks that's up in the top half of the draft, people are going to ask questions. And you brought this up before. A lot of times it's the scouts hoping some of these guys fall later in the draft and saying, boy, I don't know if this guy's a crisp route runner. I've heard through the grapevine this guy might not have great hands. And it's almost never come to fruition.
I am getting roasted on YouTube right now. Shannon Burgess, LSU fan, says, get out of here, BA. He says it's much ado about nothing. Cliff Nelson says, BA, how is Orgeron a mess? Sometimes I think you're still mad at LSU for blowing out Georgia in the 2003 or 2011, maybe he's referring to, SEC championship game. I mean, listen, you had, Cliff, with all due respect here, you had Orgeron go on TV and criticize his offensive coordinator for like the first play he ran, like the second game of the season or whatever it was. I mean, that is not a super clean, buttoned up, professional situation when that Canada Orgeron thing played out so publicly. Plus, you know, I mean, listen, LSU's a pretty talented team last year, and they're losing games left and right. I'm not trying to, like, you know, pull scabs back off of wounds here,
right.
But let's not act like that, you know, Orgeron was Vince Lombardi in 2017.
Well, I didn't hear. I'll respond to Esteves on YouTube.
Yeah, come to my defense here for a moment.
He says 40 time has nothing to do with game speed, and he's obviously talking about what I brought up against Arden Key. And that's fine. Now, I agree with you. He says, you know, players play faster during a game. Here's the problem. Everybody's run a Pro Day 40. Everybody's running a Combine 40. And Arden Key still doesn't stack up in the top, you know, 10 of the guys that I think he should be stacking up with. I don't think the 4.940 is a good enough look for a defensive end playing at 238 pounds. And then he goes on record and says, well, you know, when I get to the league, I'm going to play between 240 and 245. You're going to add weight and you were still running that slow. It's fair. I understand why LSU fans have Arden Key's back. I think he's a great player, has a ton of fast twitch ability, knows how to rush the passer. But I'm asking questions about his 40 because he's been training for that and it didn't look good.
Cliff Nelson says, and this is on YouTube, Cliff's a big LSU fan, he says, Matt Canada was a cancer everywhere he's been. Esteban Aceves says, Matt Canada wasn't Orgeron's hire, that was clearly a Joe Oliva hire. Y'all act like we don't have archives of these shows. Don't make me go back and find what y'all were saying about Canada this time a year ago. Now, I know good and well that Shannon Burgess and Esteban Esteves and Cliff Nelson have been with us from the beginning. I can go back and find y'all comments about what y'all were saying about Matt Canada a year ago. Don't be trying to play that card right now. Come on, even you got to admit that.
It is tough. And listen, I'm going to bat my LSU guys up here for a minute because I think they were excited about the X's and O's. They were excited about the X's and O's that Matt Canada could bring. They didn't know that Matt Canada and Ed Orgeron were going to get along in the office and that might have an effect on the game plan. They were excited about the hire that they thought they were getting because they were moving on from that old style of offense that Les Miles have been running.
I see what you're trying to do here, and it's not working. Well, I see what you're trying to do here, and it is not working.
You guys back.
Let's move on to item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Do you remember yesterday when I said that Auburn was the Intercontinental Champion of the SEC? So for those of you that didn't follow pro wrestling, you got like your main event guys that battle for the World Championship belt. The Intercontinental is sort of the best of the rest. It's sort of the champion of the mid-card wrestlers, the guy that sort of appear on the middle of the rundown of matches. Well, if you ever want to sort of see some statistical data for just how true that is, let's go back to this ESPN FPI data for a moment in terms of percentage chances of winning the SEC. I gave you Florida at 3.4%. Well, how about the fact that that's among the better choices in terms of SEC, at least if you want to start ranking teams? You got Alabama at 37.1, we talked about that. Georgia at 41.6. And then the third best odds to win the SEC is Auburn at 11%. But get this. The next team is the Florida team we've already talked about at 3.4. Then you get Mississippi State at 3.1. You got A&M at 1%, South Carolina at 1.5%. Everybody else is less than 1% to win the league. Think about how big the gap is between Auburn at number 3, at least according to this, which is just like we talked about yesterday, Auburn at number 3, and almost anybody else in the SEC. Does your eyes agree with what the calculators of the ESPN folks are saying is that there's a big gap between Alabama and Georgia, you get down to Auburn, and then a huge gap between, and really almost an even bigger gap between Auburn and the rest of the SEC. Do you agree with that?
My eyes do agree with that. I think that's a fair statement when you look at how ESPN is calculating these things because, listen, I get on Gus Malzahn a lot because I don't think there's consistency in the way they play on the road and the way they play at home. But there is consistency within that program. You've brought it up a ton of times. Gus Malzahn, for every good or bad, he's been at least consistent in what he's done at Auburn. Where do you find consistency at any of the other top programs in the SEC?
Not right now.
Dan Mullen, for everything I've said good about Florida, I don't know. I'm expecting Florida to get to that 8-win plateau, but boy, they could really come up short of that and make me look bad. South Carolina's the same way. Boy, you think South Carolina can do some good things, but has Will Muschamp ever shown the ability to kind of get over that hump? LSU, ton of questions. We just went through a bunch of LSU's questions. A&M's the same way. I mean, for all the teams you think could be good within the SEC and that have historically been good, there's a ton of question marks about all of them. So I think that Auburn has to slip in there at the third, and then it's a big kind of toss-up after that.
On Facebook, our comment section earlier, Tony Mariotti said he sees Mississippi State getting 10 or 11 wins this season, which is obviously sort of pushed them ahead of Auburn there into that third spot in the SEC there at that point. For me, I am not taking a brand new first-year coach, a guy that you literally just took the package off of, unwrapped the plastic from, against a Gus Malzahn who's been doing this for a while, who has a legitimately better roster. I am not taking Mississippi State against Auburn this season, not individually head-to-head, not for the year. I know that's going to make the Mississippi State fans mad because they got Nick Fitzgerald coming back and they got a pretty good collection of defensive guys, but Auburn's got more. I can't give you 10 wins for Mississippi State at the expense of an Auburn team that's just more talented.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm not as high on Auburn as maybe a lot of people are, because Auburn just kind of gets that. Boy, you look at them, boy, they should be the third best team. So it seems like matching up against Mississippi State, they should roll over them. I think Mississippi State can get them. I won't be shocked if Mississippi State wins the game at all. Like, I will not be shocked at all. I just don't know what Joe Moorhead's team is going to look like. This is the first time head coach really in the SEC. So they could come out and win 3 games. He could fall flat on his face and be on the hot seat by the end of the year. I just don't know. But I think that Mississippi State definitely has the talent this year to be able to get it done against Auburn.
Apple CEO Tim Cook, who is an Auburn grad, was speaking at an event in Birmingham, and in the Q&A session, someone asked him, hey, who do you think is going to be better this year, your alma mater Auburn or Alabama? Tim Cook, as you're probably not going to be surprised on, took the Tigers. Here's what the Apple CEO had to say.
I'm a big a fan of Coach Malzahn, and I think they have some incredible athletes, and they play as a team, and both offensive and defensive coaches are top drawer, and so I'm looking for a big season.
Can I be honest with you for a second? I don't know why I picked this on.
I was wondering what direction you were going to go with that, Tim Cook.
Like on the show, a lot of times I like to sort of throw a little color, a little culture or whatever into the program. When I was playing this audio for myself before the show started, I was like, this is just worthless. There is nothing to this. There's no value. He knows as much about Auburn football as I know about some English Premier League soccer team. Like, you could pick any hockey team. I could talk as expertly about that hockey team as Tim Cook is talking about Auburn football there. He thinks the offensive and defensive coaches are top drawer. He thinks they play together as a team, and therefore they're going to be better than Alabama. A rich guy likes his alma mater. Film at 11, breaking news.
Shocker, right? I mean, blow me off the top step here.
What a waste of time. Sometimes it's one of those things where it's like you're rushing to get something together and you don't quite really realize it's not really that valuable until you really actually hear it in real time. So I apologize for wasting everybody's time.
I tell you what, we did open a little bit of a can of worms because some of these predictions for next year are starting to fly in, because we're talking about Mississippi State, Auburn, all those things. And Shannon Burgess says, I'm feeling frisky today. I'm calling it now. Tennessee beats Florida this year in the battle of the first-year coaches. Just keep these coming, guys.
Yeah, please.
Let me write these down and make sure we get all these
Without a doubt. We've said this before. I love it when y'all do this. It doesn't have to be about your team. Shannon's an LSU fan. He's like, I got Tennessee over Florida. Yeah, keep that stuff coming in. We'll just talk about that stuff every day. And as we get a little bit more into the summer, we're going to have a little bit more space in between some of the topics where we can kind of just do a lot more of this stuff on the freestyle. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So keep those coming. Whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, either one, that's going to be a lot of fun there. Let me move on to item number 5 here on SEC Country Live, our first and 10 list. And I do know why I played this audio, and it's kind of for maybe a sinister reason. You're going to call me a jerk for this. But so Bo Mattingly is a great radio host in the state of Arkansas. Done a good job talking about the Razorbacks there and the sports in the natural state for quite some time. And obviously Chad Morris, the brand new Arkansas coach, getting ready to begin his career. Morris's track record was head coach at SMU. Before that, he was offensive coordinator at Clemson. Keep that in mind, because the guy brought on to talk about Morris here is the former Clemson head coach, Tommy Bowden, who was replaced by Dabo Swinney, which became Chad Morris's boss. This is all going to be relevant here as Bo Mattingly asked Tommy Bowden what he thinks Chad Morris's chance of success are at Arkansas. See if you detect any bitterness here on the part of Bowden. Take a listen.
He's extremely confident. I think I've read some of his press conferences out there and some of his dealings with the press. If one thing you'll notice, he's completely confident he's going to get the job done. He's careful, obviously, not to put a time frame on it because recruiting of players are going to be able to do what he wants to do. But he has a background offensively. He got his feet wet in college football there at SMU, which is going to help him at Arkansas. But this is competition at its highest level and probably the toughest division in college football over in that Western Division of the SEC. So we're going to find out rather shortly whether he's going to be able to handle that and get that system taught quick enough and how patient the people, the administration of Arkansas is.
Am I wrong to say I'm detecting maybe a little bit of bitterness on the part of Bowden there? Are you hearing that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, for sure. Listen, and here's what it was. What do you say? He's careful not to put a time frame.
Right.
Well, yeah. I really look between that. It's like, boy, he sounds really confident, but he's careful not to say next year or the year after that.
Yeah, you're right. So he sort of dings him for a lack of specificity. But here's the thing. Think about this in your own life. When have you ever said, boy, that guy's really confident, and meant that as a compliment for anybody?
Yeah.
Anytime you're talking about somebody else and say, woo, he's confident, that's almost always a jab. It feels like Bowden's taking a jab at a Morris, but I'm also a jerk. I have a tendency to read stuff. I have a tendency to read negativity in where it doesn't exist there. That was not a glowing sort of appraisal of Chad Morris.
Yeah, it was interesting too because I think when you look at the fact that he calls him confident, what's the one thing that Brett Bielema had? It was confidence. Like he was confident that this thing was going to get turned around and Brett Bielema was going to do this and Arkansas was going to be that, and he had confidence. And so I like the fact that he kind of highlights it, but you're right. It did feel like he was pulling the rug out from underneath him a little bit and saying, boy, he's confident he's going to get it done. You better not put a time frame on that thing.
You asked for some predictions from some of our audience. Greg Steele, who's a Florida fan, says, my prediction, Tennessee will lose its own spring game.
Yeah.
That's not bad, Greg. I like that.
Morgan over on YouTube says, my prediction, LSU gets swept by Bama, Auburn, UGA, and Florida this year.
Wait, give me that one again.
LSU.
And by the way, you got to at least give the last name a shot.
Rectian.
I think it's Rectian. I think it's Rectian.
In that case, LSU gets swept by Bama, Auburn, UGA, and Florida. It's hard not to agree with that, I think.
Give it Bama.
The Florida one's the toss-up.
Bama, Auburn,
Georgia,
and
Florida.
LSU's going to beat Florida. Y'all. Yeah. Y'all don't even want to hear it from me, so I'm not going to say it. Woo, Florida's got...
Yeah, where's that game at this year? Where's the Florida LSU?
It's in Gainesville like every year for like the next 9 years.
Yeah,
remember, that's your boy Oliva's deal.
Yeah,
he's got that thing in Gainesville for like the next decade and a half.
That's a bad move.
I can see LSU beating Florida. LSU hasn't won in Jordan-Hare since almost as long as I think Auburn has won in Death Valley. So that's been kind of an issue there. But I'll give them the Florida game.
Here's my issue with the Florida LSU game and following this series for the last couple of years. Was it 2 years ago that they won on the 4th and 1 play and had a defensive stop? I did not think there was any chance that Florida was going to win that game in Death Valley 2 years ago. And they were like plus 500. It was like plus 500 were the betting odds on that game to pick Florida, and somehow they came and winning the game. So there are some strange things that happen in the game because there's always a ton of talent on the field between those two teams.
Morgan says it's Rectine, by the way. Morgan Rectine. Thanks,
gotcha,
Morgan. All right, let's do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. An update on the LeBron versus Saban feud Alabama has released another episode of its barbershop theme web series. This time changing the name though. It was Shop Talk,
yeah.
And now it's Bama Cuts. Let's show you some of what's out here as the brand new Bama Cuts is released. It's more chit-chatting and sort of relaxed, casual tomfoolery. Saban lets it be known that he doesn't know how to send a text message, that he doesn't know, I think his phrase is, how to use Miss Siri. He's very relaxed, very casual, but also sticking it right back to LeBron as he promised he would. And remember, it wasn't that long ago in which Nick Saban said this.
No, I don't have a reaction to it. I think LeBron James is a great player. There's been at least 20 barbershop type things I've seen on TV. I didn't know anybody owned that. I didn't even know he had one. I'm sorry that anybody could be offended by something that we were just having fun with, and I enjoyed it, and we're going to continue to do it.
And he did. He put the new one out. Of course, LeBron James was ready to fire back the other day. Remember, if you've forgotten, LeBron James had this message for Nick Saban.
You guys know Nick Saban more than I do. from a media perspective. I'm not saying you personally. From a media perspective, you guys know Nick Saban more than I do, so that's exactly what I would think he would say. But I built Uninterrupted for a reason, for us athletes to have a platform to be able to speak about whatever we want to talk about. I respect him as a coach, but I'll be damned if I allow someone to use our platform or try to do the same thing we're doing and just think it's okay. So the lawyers will figure it out.
Mike and Michelle Tankersley on Facebook says LeBron is all drama, and I kind of agree with that as well. I believe he does cultivate drama here, which would almost seem that it feels like this is one of those moments where he's supposed to respond back to this. Now, normally he goes sort of radio silent during the playoffs. Playoffs haven't started yet, so he's got a window here to respond. Do you think LeBron says something else publicly about the barbershop game?
I think that from everything I've seen, now you guys tell me if I'm wrong, from everything I've seen from a national standpoint, LeBron's been getting hammered over this in a national media sense. I mean, I've yet to find anybody in the national media that agrees with him. And with the playoffs coming up around the corner and the whole playoff push for Cleveland right now and trying to stay healthy and trying to get where they need to be, I think it's a detrimental look for LeBron if he responds again at this point. He already said, let's let the lawyers handle it. I'm going to be damned if I'm going to let somebody use my platform, blah, 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 blah. I think if he goes back into it at this point, it's a terrible look for LeBron. I don't think there's any way that LeBron opens himself up to that kind of criticism at this point of the season and goes back into this little battle with Nick Saban, because I don't think he's going to win. They changed the name of it to Bama Cuts. They took shop out of it because that's really the only thing they could have been infringing upon, and I think that'll put this all to bed.
But he's going to be asked about it, though, right?
He's definitely going to be asked about it. I think he gives a no comment.
You think he gives a no comment?
I think he gives a no comment. I cannot see him going into detail about all this lawyer talk over this barbershop show and his uninterrupted platform. I don't see it happening. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe LeBron just wants to be whiny and talk about it some more, but I don't see it happening.
Steve Isbell says maybe LeBron needs to worry about flopping the playoffs again. Eli Johnson says LeBron knows he won't get another ring, so he's going after someone else that can win championships. That's actually a pretty good take there. LeBron not expected to win the NBA title this year, coming after Saban, the reigning national champion in college football. I'm sort of disappointed if LeBron, takes a backseat on this. And you were right the first time. You're probably right on this. But, boy, I'd love nothing more for this feud to at least go a little bit longer into the offseason. That'd be great.
Yeah,
That'd be so much fun. I mean, the fact that the media has coaxed Saban and LeBron into feuding over this anyway is one of its crowning achievements. I mean, this is one of the greatest moments in media history. Listen. The fact that much like two middle school kids who got dragged onto the catwalk and started fighting with each other, the fact that the sort of stirred-up media has gotten Saban and LeBron squaring off. This is an all-time great media accomplishment.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. And listen, I said this before. I think that Nick Saban, this is an opportunity. And I think this has gone as well as he could have possibly hoped. There's people watching this show now that didn't even know existed a week ago. And I don't know, what kind of light he comes off and watching the show. I think he's trying to come off more personable. And now that there's so many more eyes on that, then I think this is the greatest exposure that Nick Saban could have asked for when they came up with this idea.
Antonio Douglas says, the funny thing is that in Georgia there's a barbershop called Bama Cuts. Maybe they should sue Alabama now too and get in on this. That's really funny, boy. I tell you what, this story takes a lot of twists and turns. Let's do item number 7 here for a moment on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We have talked a lot about Florida's issues at quarterback and what may be frustrating for a lot of Gators fans this season, while their own guy may be struggling depending on who it ends up being. And with all due respect, maybe one of those guys ends up confounding expectations and playing well. For now, Dan Mullen hasn't been all that complimentary, while quarterbacks that either were at Florida or almost came to Florida are drawing rave reviews. Let me start with a ESPN piece that quoted West Virginia coach Dana Holgorsen talking about former Florida quarterback Will Greer, that transferred to Morgantown, West Virginia, and has lit the world on fire and is expecting big things in 2018. What Holgorsen told ESPN is, he looks like a fifth-year quarterback to me. It's his second year in his system, and he's much more comfortable. His timing with the guys is as good as I've seen. So from a quarterback perspective, it's as good as anyone in the country. That's a almost Heisman-type recommendation for Holgorsen about Will Greer. It could be big productivity for him in the Big 12 this season. But do you remember when former recruit in the class of 2018, Matt Corral, was a Gators commit? When Dan Mullen took the job, I think it's safe to say that he He slow-played Corral. He visits Justin Fields in a pipe dream scenario first, doesn't go out to California to see Corral until much later. Corral didn't feel the love, ended up going to Ole Miss, Well, now the light may be coming on for Corral there in Oxford. Here is a quote from Matt Luke, that's the Ole Miss coach of the Jackson Clarion Ledger, who says it's really night and day right now. After 8 or 9 practices, you can see all those freshmen. The light bulb starts to go off a little bit. I think the knowledge is definitely increasing. That's things about a backup quarterback for now at Ole Miss that you're not hearing about backup quarterbacks at Florida. So if you're a Gators fan, which of these two is going to be more frustrating? Corral potentially having success at Ole Miss, or Greer having a huge year to close things out at West Virginia?
It's tough for me because I think Matt Corral has a ton in front of him. I really do. But I'm not sure at this point, if I'm looking at, if you're giving me the opportunity, I'm just not sure that I'm taking Matt Corral over Kyle Trask at this point. You know what I mean? Like, if Kyle Trask is looking this good within Dan Mullen's offense, yes, Matt Corral is this young guy, and yes, he's got his whole career ahead of him. Kyle Trask, if he got a medical red shirt, could potentially have 4 years too. I think it's Will Greer. I think you look at Will Greer and think, boy, if the Heisman Trophy winner had to transfer out of the University of Florida the same way in which, Cam Newton kind of had to with the whole, thing going on behind it, and he goes somewhere else and wins a Heisman Trophy, you've got to feel so frustrated as a Florida fan because they have not had a quarterback in the last, 8 years now since Tebow left.
Rick Keene says, and he's a Florida fan, he says if it continues like it is, Dan Mullen needs to consider Kadarius Toney as an option. I think they love Toney, but more as an offensive playmaker, not as a quarterback. Yeah. I think he's probably best suited for that. Will Scott, taking a little bit of a jab at Florida, says Matt Corral is going to be the next great former Florida quarterback. And boy, it is funny. We're working on a list of these quarterbacks who've left Florida, gone on to success other places. Cam Newton may be at the beginning of that list. Will Greer may be the most recent. But, Corral, it is not a great look for Mullen. And this is one you can blame Mullen for, because he did not show Corral any love. And you can say, well, Corral's not a good fit for a system. I'm no scout. I don't pretend to be one. I'm not a former coach. I'm not a former player. But go watch Corral's huddle film. He's running all over the place the whole time. This idea that he's some, sort of like flat-footed, statue quarterback. Yeah. That's not what his film shows.
I agree with you about that. And we wondered the question of, would Matt Corral stick on with Florida and would Dan Mullen really want him? And I think you go get Emory Jones, and I think he's the higher-ranked player. But ask me right now who you'd rather buy. Would you rather have Matt Corral or Emory Jones at this point, knowing what Emory Jones has kind of been buried on the depth chart and really kind of scraping together third-string reps? Would you rather have Matt Corral in that role? I'm not as far down on Kyle Trask as some people seem to be. I mean, if he wins the job outright, then that just means he was better than Emory Jones and better than Felipe Franks and is better fit for this offense. And who knows what the ceiling is? It just the whole Matt Corral thing to me doesn't really stick. It's the Will Greer thing to me that I think is tough because listen, this is a Florida team that. Jacoby Brissett was a pretty good quarterback elsewhere. Brantley was a pretty good quarterback elsewhere. They've dealt with some of these transfers over the last 10 years, and it has not been very good for Florida. Yeah. It's been to the detriment of their really product they put on the field.
All right, a couple comments here. First of all, Stephen Young says Matt Corral didn't fit Dan Mullen's schemes. We don't need him. We want Emory Jones. But, Stephen, the problem with that is, and I'm not trying to turn this into an argument, and I'm not trying to poke at Florida fans here. If Matt Corral doesn't fit Dan Mullen's system, then Kyle Trask definitely doesn't fit Dan Mullen's system, at least based on what I think I know about Kyle Trask.
We don't know, though. I mean, Kyle Trask is, like you've said a couple of times, he didn't even start in high school. Right. So it's not like we have a ton of film on him to really know what he is.
But, I mean, the thumbnail sketch we've all been given is that he's a thrower. That Trask in there to throw, Corral, I think the 24/7, the recruiting service actually listed him. I don't know if that is a dual threat quarterback or not. The truth is, I don't know. But you watch his film, y'all. I mean, he's running around all over the place.
This is the upper echelon of what I think Kyle Trask can be in my head. I think of a Josh Allen style of quarterback. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Josh Allen. Don't y'all go run with that in the comment section like you can. But I think of a Josh Allen style where it's Sam Darnold. The
Wyoming quarterback?
The Wyoming quarterback that, will be a first-round pick. He's the big body. What is he, 6'5"? He's like 225, a big body, can still get around, can still be a little bit mobile. That's what I'm planning in my head. But it goes both ways. I haven't seen the film on him either. Nobody has. We haven't even seen him play in a Gators uniform yet, so it's going to be a lot of answered questions on spring game.
All right, let me fly through a lot of these comments. Jeff Hefner says, Emory will be the future. And that very well may be true. I'll ask the same question now. Or a similar question when I asked early in the show. We should probably do some homework for this about quarterbacks that have gotten off to a slow start but ended up having really good careers. I'm sure there's a list of those guys that are out there. Yeah. It's just that lately we've been conditioned to expect good quarterbacks to play well as freshmen. That's probably an unfair thing. And by the way, we even predicted this, that it would be unfair to Emory Jones to have these big expectations as a freshman just based on the fact that a lot of other SEC teams have had a lot of freshmen recently.
We had the expectations for Jones, but this is a conversation that came up. If you remember when Dan Mullen said, I'm going to open these practice practices up to the fans for the first like 5 practices.
Yeah, that's true too.
All the cameras have been out there, and what we've seen on those cameras and what people have reported and what we've been reported from the scrimmages has not looked good. And so I think it has been unfair. I played with a number of guys that redshirted, and it took a couple of years. I got myself included. I didn't play till I was a sophomore. It took me a while. It took some of the quarterbacks. It took A.J. McCarron got redshirted. Greg McElroy got redshirted. A lot of the quarterbacks I played with got redshirted, and they ended up being pretty good quarterbacks on national championship teams.
By the way, Bo Molinari, who's a Texas A&M fan, says, I still want Emory Jones over Matt Corral. That's an interesting opinion. George Medina says, Kyle Trask is Mullen's best option. I even thought in McElwain's offense that'd be true. The kid is super talented, so that's an interesting comment there from George Medina.
And I hope I say this right because I'm about to butcher this. Chino Mandujano, I think is what you say, how you say your name.
Close
I don't
enough.
care who quarterbacks for Florida as long as the O-line blocks. And this right here, guys, is why I'm higher on Florida than most people are, because I think they have the talent on the one deep of the offensive line with Nick Savage as their new strength coach to where they can be very good on that offensive line. And I think they're going to be a running style team, and I think they've got the wideouts there, and I think they've got the rush-ins where they can have a very good football team.
All right, let's do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Paul Meyerberg weighed in. He's a USA Today college football writer about some teams that finished last in their conference and division a year ago who are hoping for better results this season. One of those teams is Tennessee. And I thought Paul wrote something kind of interesting about the Vols here. Let me read this to you from USAtoday.com. He says, the Vols can tuck away the red-faced embarrassment of Butch Jones last season, and that tenure is mercifully over, and look toward the future under Jeremy Pruitt, who is in the process of installing a blueprint sharpened during a successful stint under Nick Saban in Alabama. What does that mean for 2018? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Paul Meyerberg writes, no one believes that UT went 0-8 in the SEC because of a lack of talent. Development, not talent acquisition, was the issue. Simply getting the Volunteers aimed in the right direction should get Tennessee to 6 wins, but probably not much more than that. Forget the prediction about the total number of wins. Do you agree with Paul Meyerberg that it was talent development and not talent acquisition that was the real problem for Tennessee? Because I don't believe that's my opinion.
Now, I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I think it's a little bit of both because I do think he had some talented players, but if development was not something Butch Jones can do, then why was Trey Smith so good last year? Was he just that incredible of a football player that he came in and played at that high of a level? Because at times he looked like one of the best offensive linemen in the SEC when you look at Trey Smith. So I don't know. There's positions, there's players. I don't think they got the most out of Alvin Kamara. We can go around, round and round about that. I think they've had good players. I think they haven't gotten the most out of them. But there hasn't been a ton of talent on that offensive line.
Yeah.
There has not been a ton of talent on that defensive line. You've had some guys here and there, and then they've gotten nicked up, and then there just hasn't been the depth. So while I think there is a little bit of a development issue, I have to point more to the talent that was not there, and I still don't think it's as good as he's probably making it out to be right now.
Teresa Stewart says, it was bad coaching. I truly believe it was bad coaching. Mike and Michelle Tankersley say, all seriousness, I think Pruitt's going to get us there in a few years. I think Pruitt may get Tennessee there in a few years. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I think he will be a good recruiter. But let's be honest about Pruitt right now. We play a lot of audio from him on this show. It never sounds like he thinks he has that talented of a team.
Not yet.
This idea that he's going to come in and be a better X's and O's coach than Butch Jones and magically find SEC wins when Jones found none last year, I don't think Pruitt thinks that.
No, I completely agree with you. And I stress this, when Jeremy Pruitt took the job, knowing Jeremy Pruitt, he's not somebody that's going to massage things and make you feel better. He's not going to come out and say he has something that he doesn't. And that was one of the things I've harped on about Jim McElwain and talked about his team last year and really was making you feel good about what they had. That's not going to be Jeremy Pruitt. He's going to come out and tell you exactly how he feels about the team. Hey, guys, get in front of the podium. Hey, guys, we're not there yet. We're not where we need to be a good competitive football team, and that's what you've heard from Jeremy Pruitt so far. Too many ups and downs.
Item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. You do have 3 SEC spring games on tap for the weekend. Let's give you the schedule here quickly. 2 of them at the same time here. You've got Ole Miss and Arkansas both at 2 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. Then the Auburn spring game comes up at 4 p.m. Eastern time. On the Auburn deal here, Gus Malzahn has not been committal one way or another about Jarrett Stidham playing in this game. My assumption is that he's not going to play. Anything that you're looking for, I know A.J. Brown, the Ole Miss wide receiver, has been banged up some this spring. I'm not sure if he's playing. You got any reason to watch any of these spring games this weekend?
I think the one I'm most looking forward to is probably the Arkansas game.
Really?
Probably the Arkansas spring game because I'm not sure. I don't know. Like Ty Story, Cole Kelly, what does this offense look like? How does the defense shape up? There's so many question marks for me. I don't think that no matter what the Auburn game looks like, I'm not taking any stock in it. Who knows what you're going to get? Quarterback. Who knows what you're going to running back? You definitely don't know with your 2 starting centers probably being out of this game and Brahms and the Kemp kid. who knows what the offensive line is going to look like? So I'm not taking any stock. If they don't score any touchdowns, I'm not going to say, boy, that defense looks nasty. You don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, listen, the best unit on display potentially on Saturday is the Auburn defense, but y'all know this. Spring games are not about defense. I mean, you don't get to sack the quarterback. You know, for the most part, you're only like what they say, like thudding.
Don't get me started on this, BA. You know, I'll go to battle for this one. I used to hate spring games. Couldn't sack the quarterback, but guess what? He couldn't get out of it. He couldn't break a tackle either. The minute you touch him like that, the player's blowing down.
So you end up getting a bad look on film.
It's like, oh, he gave up a sack. Did I give up a sack, or did the guy like reach out and flick his ear?
You're right. It's not real football in that regard, but you're only like thudding up the running backs. You're not really hitting them hard. I mean, it's not a great way to put on display what I think can be a great Auburn defense. But if Stidham plays, that one may be worth watching a little bit. And I guess we just talked about Matt Corral. I'm assuming we'll see some interesting things from Corral down there in Oxford.
Yeah, I think we will too. And I think you're going to see Ole Miss come out and play a good brand of offensive football. I guess what I want to see is what they have along the defense line. When you talk about Speaks and Haynes and some of those guys that are losing after last year, can they get after the quarterback like that Landshark defense of old? I think that's what I'm going to be looking for out of that game.
All right, item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10. Our buddy Dan Mullen, the Florida coach, is back at it. He is really enjoying himself some campus life at Florida. Latest appearance for Mullen, waking up early to go out and run with the Florida ROTC unit. Here's how the Florida football account was able to sort of capture some of that on video. Take a look at Mullen, all smiles in his element there in Gainesville. Take a look at this.
Well, you know, it's fun. I mean, they're out here. You know, I come out and try to run in the morning. Sometimes I see them, and you know, hopefully I'm going at the same time. Sometimes they might even be finished when I'm getting going. You know, it's great to be out, to be with them,
so you kind of get the sense of that, running with the ROTC. There have been a lot of these moments from Mullen here as of late. It was not too long ago. We'll show you this. Speaking to some of the Florida frat houses, hanging out with some of the frat guys. They had their nicest sleeveless T-shirts on for his appearance there. He also made an appearance recently with some of the Florida sorority houses, hanging out with the Greek gals there on the Florida campus, kind of talking to them. He even got involved in one of the Student Center dodgeball games. He's throwing the dodgeball around there. I mean, he's just living up campus life like a regular old college guy. Yeah. I mean, at this point in time, Mike, there's really only about one thing left for Dan Mullen to do there on the Florida campus.
We're going streaking! Yes!
I mean, that's about the only, if he really wants to stay on that Florida campus, that's about the only thing left for him to do, right?
I thought you were going to say something like, oh, all he needs to do now is lose to Georgia, or all he needs to do now is try to win some football games.
He's in great shape. No, I'm not taking a shot here. I'm saying he's in great shape himself with the Florida students.
No, I agree. But to me, is it too much though? Because you guys know I'm a dead
you've been critical this whole time.
I don't know what it's for. Like, I don't know what it's for. Is he being like, hey, if we're not very good in year one, please don't boo me out of the stadium?
Yeah, his team. We gave you the stats earlier. His team's got a 3% chance to win the SEC. That's what all this is for.
It's like I want to go up and shake him and be like, Dan, you already got the job. Like, you don't have to get voted into the Florida head coaching job. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not running for office, Dan. Like, you already got the head coaching job.
But listen. People don't sue doctors that they like, right? You sue the doctor you hate for malpractice. If Mullen goes up there and goes 4-8 this year, a lot of these students are going to be like, you know what? Dan's a pretty good guy. He came out and ran with me one day when in ROTC training. You know, as Will Scott says, he did a keg stand with me at the frat house. I mean, you know, he's kind of out there in our element, hanging out with us. He's buying himself up some goodwill for what happens when things don't go well this fall.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is that? But you really think that's his aim? Like, I don't.
Of course.
I think he's trying to get people excited for the spring game. I think that's a big deal for first-year head coaches. Got to have things packed out. Got to have the excitement a little through the roof. But man, he's doing a lot of it. He's doing more than I've ever seen any coach do.
I think it's good. I mean, you're an elitist. See, this is such a difference between you. You know, you live in your gated mansion. You know, as former NFL player. Like the rest of us, like average fans, we don't ever get a chance to meet these coaches. The fact that they come onto our turf and say, you know what, we need you. They shake our hand. This is a good thing. This is Mullen being of the people, something that you can learn something about.
I'm not hating on the guy. I'm just curious what his angle is.
This guy goes to NASCAR races, never leaves his RV. I mean, this guy just stays pinned up in that RV.
He goes out there to the free campground in the mud. I don't know.
I hope every Florida fan paying attention notices that every single time we've had one of these stories, Mike has criticized it every time. And I have said good for Dan.
Well, at least I'm not flip-flopping. But the Florida fans tell me, what's the angle here? Like, what's the good coming out of it?
You've got to earn some favor with your people.
Have you ever seen any coach do that?
You know what?
Maybe Jim Harbaugh.
I haven't seen a lot of Florida coaches go 4-8 either.
Well, that's a good point. Maybe I hate to say the name Jim Harbaugh because I don't like Jim Harbaugh, but it feels like something Jim Harbaugh, like doing things differently, like sleep over at recruits.
Yeah, that's what I said. The next thing you'll tell me is Mullen's going to be sleeping at some recruit's house, which probably will not happen. All right. We close the show the same way here every single day. We're always on the lookout for champions of life. And today, our champion of life comes from the ranks of a former SEC player who does Mark Ingram play for in the NFL now? I have no idea. He used to play for the Saints. Somehow I don't think he does anymore. But he's in the NFL playing for somebody. Do we know? Anybody know Ingram's team? Is it still the Saints? All right, still the New Orleans Saints. So they're on a tour of like military type places. And one of these attack dogs, Ingram gets in the pen with the attack dog, which makes him braver than me to begin with. And, well, what happens next is the kind of sight you just have to behold. Here's Mark Ingram trying to run away from the well-trained attack dog. Take a look at this. Watch this dog.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's quite a tackle. A little high, a little bit of an arm tackle there. Doesn't go low enough for some of the coaches out there, but takes Ingram down. And then Ingram had a sort of a great explanation for kind of what happened here. You love Ingram's sense of humor about all this. Here's Mark Ingram on his own social media account.
Listen, man, the dog video, there's a lot that goes into it, right? It was a crazy situation. So everybody, I was peer pressured. I haven't fell into peer pressure my whole life. And they peer pressured me to go out here and get attacked by this dog, right? So the first time, he just ran up close to me, bit my arm, I handled him. Second time, he was a little farther away, bit my arm, I handled him. Then the third time, they said, run away from him, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna run. And everybody else was like, juke him, like make him miss, right? So I'm like, no. The dog looked excited, so I'm like, no, I'm not gonna juke him. And so I started running. Then I saw him behind me, and I was like, okay, let me spin out of it. Then I spun, and he got my arm. Then he slung me, he horse collared me. But I got up though like a champ. Cause I'm a beast. I can't let him hold me down. But the dog, he was a bad mother. I'll tell you that.
So I love Ingram's sense of humor about that. And I'll say this before any of y'all get a chance to say it. If a dog could have tackled a Tide player back in January like that, we'd be having a very different conversation on this program right now.
I got to tell you, have you ever done this before? I had this done to me one time.
I'm definitely afraid of dogs. I'm so afraid of dogs.
I thought it was going to be like a cool experience. It was not a cool experience.
Yeah,
like,
I'm so afraid of dogs.
Death. Like I had those sleeves on and I had a dog on each arm. No, this is what happened. I thought the dog was coming from the left, but they sneakily let one go from the right too, and I got hit from both sides. I had to change my underwear. I had to change my underwear. That's horrifying. I'm telling you.
All right, thanks for being with us on the program today. As we said yesterday, I know some of you have complained about the audio on the podcast. We are working on that to get that boost, to get that louder. Hopefully we'll get that taken care of for you, but you can check that out on all the Apple Podcasts, Android devices, all of that. It should be up for you at the end of the show here. Also, thanks for sharing the show with your friends on Facebook and YouTube. Let them know that we're talking about the SEC here every afternoon, Monday through Thursday on SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy the Masters. Enjoy what's hopefully good weather near where you are. And we'll see you again on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern time for another episode of SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day.